Let me turn this off.
Well, that was the last minute.
So good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm sure a few more people might filter in as we go in. But I do like to start things on time as much as possible. I feel like it honors your time, but also honors my time. And so the very beginning of most presentations are pretty general stuff. Okay, so if you're ever a little late, don't worry about it. And if you ever need to go, and just as like housekeeping stuff, like if you need to take a call, if you have to leave, like you're not hurting my feelings, like just we're all adults, mostly. Just do what you got to do. Okay, it's not an offense to get up and leave if you have other obligations. Another thing that I always like to start with to make sure you guys remember is that I do broadcast this, and so it's broadcasting right now. So I just give you that disclaimer in case you ask questions. You will go on YouTube. Okay, so it's just an important thing to know. I'm aiming for about an hour tonight. Okay, so hopefully we'll be out of here about 6 o'clock. Time to go home and get some dinner and things like that. But I always say that we're going to take the time we need to make sure that all the information comes across. Okay, so if it takes us a few extra minutes, that's totally fine. But I'm aiming for my information I hope to get across to you to take about an hour. But if we have questions and things that we want to kind of digest along the way, that's totally okay. We've had the luxury of getting to work together for the last few years. Well, I guess 2 years now. This will be our second year. And it wasn't always that way. I used to have all students on the North Tahoe High School caseload. And it's taken me getting used to getting to meet all of the students in 10th grade while seeing people, both adults and students, all over the school for a full year, but never really getting to work directly with them. And so it's something that I'm still getting used to, but it's been a great experience, and having Lisa on board has been awesome in that 8th and 9th grade transition piece. Tonight, as the junior informational session, I'm hoping to cover a few key pieces with you guys about how to make this year a very useful, productive, and fruitful year for both students and parents. Okay, I know that most people that come to these things are generally the adults. It is something that as students get older, so 9th grade, 10th grade even, this information is more for the parents. This year and next year, every year that goes by, the information actually becomes more for the student, less for the parent. Okay, because as students get older, they're going to be expected to do much more in this process. Okay, so every year that your student goes through school, you should be taking kind of another step back, and allowing them to take that next step forward. Okay, and that's hard. I have a 3-year-old, so I don't fully get. I have a lot of high school students, but they're not my own, and that makes a big difference. I've found. I always thought like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but it really is. When you have your own, it makes a big difference. It's that unbiased and biased relationship, so you have feelings and emotion tied to it in a different way, and so it is something that's really important to practice. Okay, so tonight we're going to kind of cover a few things. We're going to talk some generalities about junior year, how to be successful no matter what potentially post-secondary plan you might have. We will spend a few slides and a few minutes talking about specifically four-year college information, because while the application and things like that start and happen in senior year, it is something that the timing and kind of the active pieces of that process starts for many people in the junior year. Okay, and so it's something that we will spend a little bit of time on, but we're going to talk about many different things tonight. Okay, and at the end, like I said, I will have plenty of time for questions for the whole group, and I'm willing to stay afterwards if you have more individual questions that are maybe not something that everyone might want or gain from. Okay, just as a reminder as well, I spent a lot of time putting information online, and my background for a short period of time in college was aerospace engineering. And so I still bring that side of my brain with me to this job, and so efficiency and productivity and stuff like that really matters to me. And so part of that means I have about 340 students on my caseload. Okay, and as much as I want to sit down and spend hours and hours with each one of them, the reality is that generally doesn't happen all the time. And so what I find helpful is I try to put in the time ahead of time to create resources and create tools and information that you can access on your own. That maybe I can be kind of that second level piece of information. Okay, so if you still have questions after reviewing this document or watching this video that I made, then let's sit down and let's go over it. Okay, so I try to spend a bunch of time, and just to remind you how to get there, if you're on the North Tahoe High School website, it probably looks a little different, but it's generally the same thing. It's under the programs menu, and there's a school counseling link. Okay, I don't even know if it's a drop down anymore. You might get taken to a second page, but it's under S under school counseling. So it looks like this. It might look different depending on when you access it, but generally things are in the same place. Okay, the biggest pieces of tool that you're going to probably find yourself accessing are a couple main areas. The first and foremost one is booking your appointment. Okay, both Lisa and I run our office on appointment systems. It helps us again be effective with our time instead of having to make phone calls back and forth trying to book our times together. So the easiest way is actually, there's a couple ways. You can click a button down here. There's a book an appointment link. It's also underneath the quick links. Okay, so pretty much anywhere you put your mouse, you'll find a way to make an appointment with us. Okay, either myself or Ms. Dolbert. In just a second, I'm going to talk to you about a case study. And there's a registration link currently on the website right there for that as well. There's a bunch of other menu items up here at the top, and sometimes that can get overlooked. Okay, so there's frequently clicked buttons under the quick links, and then each domain of school counseling: academic, college and career, and social emotional. Those are 3 areas that we work in. Each one has a little menu item that you can find different resources from community therapists and support people under our social emotional things to college and career guidance and history about financial aid and things like that. Okay, so I do hope that you will explore that a little bit. And just like I tell the students, there are no dumb questions, but you should do a little research first. Okay, that's always a good piece of advice. Sometimes they'll ask me, like, I want to email the college and look good, and I want to ask them a question. Not a bad idea, but you better make sure the question is not on their homepage, the answer. Okay, so you got to do a little bit of homework, maybe a little bit of Googling, to make sure that you're not kind of like looking at right in your face on the first link. Okay, a couple things that I want to mention too, and this is something that I think there's a misconception, and I want to make sure that we cover it because, like I said, we're going to talk some about four-year college, but I think there's a misconception about what North Tahoe is all about. Okay, I think there's a perception in the community or in students or parents or even educators that work here that anybody that goes to North Tahoe High School should go to college. Okay, that everyone that goes to North Tahoe High School is expected to go on to university or college. And I would disagree with that. I think it's not far off, but it makes a few big differences of how it's worded. Okay, and really what I think we want to try to emphasize is that everybody that goes to North Tahoe High School should have an opportunity to go to college if they chose to. And that makes a big difference. It doesn't necessarily change their preparation steps, but it does change what people perceive about themselves and perceive about other pathways to careers, to education and training and things like that. Okay? So it is important for us. We value meeting A through G requirements and helping students become prepared for that four-year college world. But we also want to recognize that is not the only path out there, and that we do highly value and support any path that students might want to take. Okay? You might have seen a statistic that looks like this thrown up in a lot of different areas. It's pretty widely used. And basically what it is, if it's hard to see, I see a couple people squinting. Basically at the top you have a doctoral degree, a professional degree, master's degree. On the left, the blue side is your median weekly salary. Okay, on the right is unemployment percentage. Okay, so it's a pretty common thing that people put up there. Okay, and as typically formal education goes down, high school diploma or less than a high school diploma is towards the bottom with less income, more unemployment. Okay, that's a pretty commonly used graphic. It is actually accurate. Okay, so it's from the Department of Labor and stuff like that. So it's not something that's false. But I think it paints a potentially poor picture if you're not interpreting it correctly. Okay, because there's a couple things that are missing. Number one is what those degrees are potentially in. Okay, so that makes a big difference. Okay, I'm in education. I have a master's degree, and I'm not probably the same as someone with a master's degree in engineering or computer science or things like that in terms of my pay scale, right? So the other thing is, what is something else that you don't see? And Karen, you can't answer. What don't you see on this list?
Vocational training?
Yeah. So you're missing a whole segment of high-paying, in-demand careers. Okay, some might say, you know what's it's in kind of this some college or associate's level, and I would say maybe some of them, but many of them, when you look at employment, they can't find enough employees in some career fields, and many of them are more in this area income-wise. Okay, and so it is something that we think it's very important, but it's not the whole picture. That skilled trade, technical work are in high demand and pay really well. Okay, and while college should be available for all, it might not be the path for all students. Okay, on that note, we do spend a large amount of time talking about college, and that's, I think, where a lot of the perception might come from, that is kind of the only path for students at North Tahoe High School, or else you did something wrong maybe on that journey. And I want to make sure that you understand that it's not true. But it does take a lot of preparation to be prepared for that journey if the students chose to get there. Okay. The bigger thing about this journey called high school and really 10th into 11th grade is really understanding what your goals are. Okay. I'll have a conversation with a student, for example, and I say, hey, what do you hope to do after you graduate high school? They're like, I'm going to college. Great, why? And they're like, no. They can't answer that question. And that's a pretty silly thing not to be able to answer. In some ways, but it's reality. Most people don't know why they want to do that. Okay, and that's something that believe it or not, I ask seniors and they don't know. And sometimes it's because all my friends have, because my parents want me to, they told me to. It's whatever reason under the sun. But ultimately, it's up to the student to start thinking about that. And the hard part about that, there's no right or wrong answer, and there's not necessarily a way. There's not a book you can look that up in. Okay, it's about introspective thought, and that's tough, even for adults. It's hard to sit down and think about what are my goals as an adult? Why am I taking this class? What am I doing? What are my next steps? What am I going to be in 5 years, next week? Okay, all those things really, really matter, because knowing what you want out of your training or post-secondary education or whatever is next, and I would say that really is our goal, that after high school, students pursue some sort of education or training, that this is not the ending of your learning. Okay? And that might be an apprenticeship and things like that, but having your goal set, like I want to be an electrician, helps define your path in a way that lets you effectively pursue your next step. Okay? I'll give you a personal example. Like I mentioned before, I started my education in college as an aerospace engineer. I'm clearly not an aerospace engineer anymore. Okay? And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That was my dream. But I figured out that I don't like roller coasters, and I figured that was probably a poor career choice on my part. So I went through, like in senior year, I went through the whole Air Force Academy application, all this rigmarole to get into that, and changed my path. I figured out I don't like that. That's probably a poor choice. So it's like, if I can't fly them, maybe I'll design them. And that sounded cool. And I went through and I figured out, you know what, I really don't like calculus and physics that much at that level. It was a lot of calculus and physics. And what I think now, looking back, is probably instead of like working on airplanes, and doing the important thing, like making sure they fly and don't crash, which we are all thankful for, I probably was more interested in like the graphic design of things. I wanted to make them look cool. That was more interesting to me than making them work. Okay? And so it took me longer to get through my path to where I am now. I'm very grateful I'm not in that industry. I really like what I do. But had I known my goals, I could have saved time, I could have saved a little bit of money along the way, and potentially had a little bit different path. I've learned from that path. Okay. The other piece that in 11th grade, 10th, 11th grade, we start seeing a little bit more of is another question I commonly ask is, okay, so you want to go to college. What college do you want to go to? And I get the word good. I want to go to a good college. It's like, I don't know that one. What's their mascot? And it's there's really no such thing. And that's hard to believe because the media hypes so many things. Okay? But a good college there's no classifications of college. The US News and World Report, hint, hint, is a scam. Okay? They're not adequate, or not adequate, but not accurate is the correct word. Representations of a quality of education. It's an information source, so you can use them, but placing value in that ranking is I would say, a fault. Okay? The thing that is important about what a good college is more about how it fits the student. Okay, and that's a big piece. Or any other career path, a trade school, an apprenticeship, kind of mentor, all those things. That path to success is the learning, innovation, and knowledge, not a particular program, college, or degree. Okay, those programs, colleges, and degrees sometimes can help open doors, but it's more about what you do during your program than what program you attend. Okay, you know, a degree can only take you so far if you can't do what you're supposed to do, right? And so I would say 99% of colleges are excellent colleges. They're going to get you an education that you will be able to market yourself and go out and do things with. I would avoid for-profit colleges. I would say those are bad colleges in most sense of the word. Okay, but in general, any college out there for there are good colleges out there for every student, but they might not be good for your particular student. Okay, for different reasons. Okay, so that's an important thing. Knowing what your goals are, and students in 11th grade will spend time, particularly in things like pathways. When I do some lessons, we'll also have later on this kind of winter, early spring time frame, what's called an ILP, or Individual Learning Plan meeting. You probably did that with Miss Dolberg in 9th grade. Am I getting my timing right? You guys had Miss Dolberg in 9th grade, not me.
Yes.
Okay, I was like, please don't be wrong about that. That would be bad. But we will continue that. We did not have a formal one. We might have met with some of you guys kind of on an informal basis last year. But we will formalize that again for this year and also in your senior year to make sure that we are having this conversation about what this looks like. Okay. Kind of skipping back to some informational pieces for a second. There is an event that's coming up on October 26th. You probably got a couple emails about it already. But if you haven't, check your calendars, because has any of you guys come to the case study before? Okay. It's a pretty informative event. Okay, what a case study is a group of college admissions officers, 7 or 8 of them or so, will come here, and we give you guys 3 or 4 fake common application documents. Okay, so full documents that let students and yourself review. And what it does is students know that typically, or will experience, the side of applying. They'll see the application, know all the stress about filling it out. But once you hit that submit button, it's like it goes into the mysterious universe, and we don't know it. You know, some gnome somewhere reads it, and then magically 2 months later, you get a letter of denial or acceptance. Okay, and there's actually a lot that happens in that process. And so this event actually lets students and parents kind of become the admissions team. Okay, so you're going to read applications, and you're going to make decisions about who gets in or who doesn't, and then we share out and compare. Okay, to see, did everyone get the same answer? Hint, hint, no, usually not. And was it the first student that you might have expected when you did your first read that got the first admission? Hint, hint, probably not. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that not necessarily the best test scores or most AP classes or anything like that are necessarily the first people that get admitted. Okay, so it's very informative and eye-opening. So that's October 26th. It starts at 2:30 here at the school, but the reason why we're telling you now is because it does require pre-registration for anybody that's attending. It's open to 12th graders and your parent or guardian, but each person will need their own separate ticket because we use it as your name tag to make groups and things like that. Okay. A couple of reminders. Additionally, just a reminder, because we hate when we have seniors roll in May and say, community service, I didn't know about that. Community service is required. And so students that have been in TTUSD schools for all 4 years will need 30 hours of community service by the time they walk across the stage at graduation. Okay, not completing 30 hours. If you have 29 hours of community service at 4 o'clock on graduation day, you will not walk across the stage and you do not receive a diploma. Okay, it's just like failing an English class. Okay, it's a board policy, so there's not wiggle room on that. There's always questions about, well, what if my kid did 30 hours my freshman year? Great, they're done with this requirement. They do have to continue then to pass their pathways class, though. Okay, so there's an hourly requirement that happens every year. But you can complete those for graduation as early as you like. Okay, we track that information. Your students, by this point, should know about this and be hitting on pretty good cylinders. So just a reminder in case you lose track of it. If you ever wonder how many you have, you can always email me too. The second thing that we start to see happen at various levels throughout high school is students changing attitudes about studying. Okay, in 11th grade, typically students have kind of started figuring things out. Anybody notice a change over the summer? with your students, positive, hopefully. I notice usually quite a bit from between when students leave kind of at the end of the spring for sophomore year and when they return, maybe not quite yet, but sometime during their junior year, it's like a magic light bulb sometimes clicks and maturation happens. But also I think what happens is they realize, oh my gosh, I'm getting out of here someday. I better get my stuff in a group. Like they realize that this is going to end and I have to make decisions and things have to happen. And so usually between sophomore and junior year, there's some pretty good changes. And usually we have to worry a little bit less about the studying. The thing that makes a big difference about studying is the coursework that people are taking tends to also change dramatically between 9th and 10th grade year and junior and senior year. Okay, kind of the floodgates have been opened in terms of rigor and expectations and what students are trying to take on. And students, at least at the beginning of junior year, kind of think they can get by with the same amount of studying and practice that they've done in the prior years and haven't necessarily grown into their junior 4 AP class shoes yet. Okay, and so just know that this is just the beginning, and this is more for our lower grades. An hour a night is pretty good in 9th and 10th grade for many students. When it's roughly about 40 to 50 minutes per AP class as well. Okay, so if you have 3 AP classes, like it could be a more expensive study time. Okay, so you have to know that getting into it. So did you know that across the country, students spend about 19 hours total on average, meaning some students do more, many students do less. Okay, and so that's a big thing. And the other piece is that studying is not just sitting down on doing assigned homework, and this becomes more important in this junior year too, and maybe some last year with AP classes and things like that, where studying is, teachers do assign homework and they value it, and we think it's useful practice, but it's oftentimes maybe not enough to make sure that you are fully prepared for an exam or an AP exam in May or things like that. Okay, so it's just an important thing to know. I want to take a few minutes and walk us through a transcript. Okay. Actually, before I do that, I didn't put a slide in there like I did last night. But before I forget to talk about this, I want to do that as we're on the topic. I just mentioned AP exams. There are some big changes that are happening with AP exams this year. Okay. Not necessarily about the exams themselves, but about the process up to exams. Okay. So there's a couple, especially time frame shifts. So the College Board has changed how the registration process works, as well as changed when it works. Okay, so how many, if you guys are in AP classes, have they talked about this with you at all yet? A little bit, might have mentioned it. Okay, so in the past, registration has all come through me, through a Google form, and I manage it all and fancy spreadsheets and stuff like that. Okay, and that usually happened around February-ish. Okay, so now the registration deadline the registration window is actually open. Students can select to take an AP exam tonight if they wanted to. But they will have to select on their College Board account, which their teachers will have helped them with, by November 8th. Okay, and that is for a test in May. Okay, so it will be due. That is the last day that students can register for an AP exam. Okay, and that's a new change, not coming from us, coming from College Board. We had actually been doing this, kind of making a slow change to having earlier registration, maybe not as early as November. Believe it or not, the preferred deadline that they give us is October 4th or something. I'm like, we've been in school for a month, like that seems ridiculous. So we're doing kind of they gave us like, okay, here's preferred and here's like the full deadline. So we're doing the full deadline. But just know that that's going to be something you have to do, and we won't add any additional tests after that unless we get a brand new student who registered elsewhere. That shouldn't be anybody in here. But if you choose to not take an exam, it will charge a $45 fee to cancel an exam. Okay. The other thing that is unfortunate but difficult is there will be no makeup exams. Okay, so that's an important thing. Every single exam is on their calendar right now. Okay, so if you Google AP 2020 exam dates, I would put in your calendar every course that your student might be is taking right now and may sit for an exam. Okay, so you know when and what time that's at. It's on this date starting at this time, so make sure it's on your calendar. There are extremely few exceptions, and it's not like our flights change on our vacation. And unfortunately, sports are not one of those exceptions. Okay, it's I was in the ER last night and I'm not released and I can't come to the exam. That is a valid excuse that we would work with, but unfortunately, yeah, the other pieces are not. So those are just, that's kind of another kind of process piece, but I wanted to make sure you guys knew that as soon as possible so that you guys can plan ahead as needed. Any questions on that? Oh, I'll tell you, so the pricing remains the same as last year, so $50 for all tests, each test. Regular price is $94. District does you guys a solid and covers some of it. But if you're on free and reduced lunch, it'll be $20 per test at school. Any questions on any of that testing stuff? Yeah.
How does registration work? Are we doing it at home or is it still?
So students will do that. So students are going to be in charge of registering. How they do that is going to be kind of up to them. Some classes might have you sit down and like do it together potentially. Most likely it's all this is brand new to us. So we're kind of figuring it out as we go just to kind of give you a little bit of background. We're kind of like maybe 2 steps ahead of everybody else and kind of like, okay, what's next? But typically it's going to be done online, so it can be done anywhere. So teachers will likely show you where you need to do that, but there's literally a checkbox that you'd fill in about I'm taking the exam or not. Okay, it's kind of like if you're familiar with Google Classroom at all, it's kind of like Google Classroom for AP. So they join a class. There's a lot of tools and resources that teachers will be using likely over the course of this year in that kind of Google or College Board AP student classroom area. That's also where you register. Any other questions on that? All right, so let me talk through a little bit about our transcripts because it's a little confusing. How many of you guys have actually looked at your transcripts? Students, I know that you guys looked at them this week, I think. I look at transcripts pretty frequently, so I'm pretty good at deciphering what they look like. Okay, so by this point, I've probably looked at your students' transcripts at least 5 times. Okay, and more so as they become closer to being a senior, to make sure that I don't miss anything. Okay, but kind of just to give you a brief overview, and this is important because what you see on the screen is what colleges see when they get them. Okay, so it's important to have an understanding of what goes on a transcript, what matters, and also employers or other people, other institutions. This is your diploma means really nothing. The fancy thing you put on your wall. This is what proves you actually graduate. Okay, so this is an important piece of document. It looks like this up here too, so you can look at either way. This one might actually be easier to read. But to kind of give you an idea of what kind of the anatomy of a transcript looks like. So over here in this kind of upper left-hand area is basically, if you think of small little report cards, they all get plugged in there. Okay, so every semester grading period gets plugged into your transcript. It has a bunch of stuff that we use here at school. The big things are going to be the name of the class, the grade with plus or minus. Plus or minus do not impact GPA, which we'll talk about. Credits attempted and credits completed. Okay, you actually graduate also based on credits, not grades. Okay, so credits are like a Unicode system. It's you get all or nothing. Okay, so you either get credits with a D or higher, or you do not get credits with F towards graduation. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. The bottom there's term GPAs and credits. Okay. And then everything is added up down here. On the left-hand side, kind of right below here, it hides sometimes. If you're ever curious, like, okay, so which classes are weighted on my transcript? Or which ones are college preparatory? Okay, there's little tags that will show you those things. For example, if you look up here, it says PE Health. There's a little asterisk. That means it's not a college preparatory course. Or essentially A through G course. Okay, and as this is more like the end of a senior, this is starting senior year, so your guys' probably doesn't look much more than a couple, like maybe a second column with an area. Okay. The second area that's most important. This is the most important because it tells us a lot of detail. Second area that's probably most important is actually your credit summary. Okay, so this is high school graduation. Okay, when we taught last year's meeting, we went through A through G, and in 9th grade, you went through a lot of the A through G requirements. We're likely not going to spend much time talking about that because hopefully you should have a little bit of understanding. If not, you might be too late. But this is important because this is high school graduation, and A through G matches it fairly closely. But it gives you all the breakdown of the subjects, how many credits are required, can you earn 5 credits each semester, and then also how many more you need. So students, when you're looking at your transcripts and pathways this week, you probably see, and it's a little confusing because you would see like halfway through the year you see 5 credits potentially. Okay. And you're like, I don't, how do you get 5 credits? It's the second half of that term, all right? Another confusing piece is on Aries. When you pull up your transcript on your end, it looks different than this, but all the same information is here, okay? It just doesn't print quite the same. The other piece that I oftentimes start getting questions when parents or students start reviewing transcripts on your own is you look at your graduation status, okay, and it'll say that you need credits when you might not, or you have more than you think you should, okay? The graduation status also oftentimes will calculate in the courses that you have in progress currently. Okay, so it'll say like the 11th grade classes that you're currently in. It's going to add those in the in progress column, and you won't see them necessarily in this needed area, and it causes some confusion. Okay. One other piece about the credit summary down here is it says, it might not say this anymore, I don't remember, but if you see it, it says Algebra 1 requirement met. A lot of people freak out about that, number one, because we don't have Algebra 1 anymore. Like, what? How do we meet that? Okay, and two, it's just a piece of coding, and it really is not necessarily a requirement that has to do with the transcript. The biggest place we see it is when students take Integrated Math 1 in 8th grade, and they're taking Integrated Math 2, and they see that, they start freaking out. Okay, it will get cleared after Integrated Math 3, because Integrated Math 2 is technically geometry and not algebra. Okay, but don't worry about it if you see it. Not a need to freak out. The last area on the transcript, all these blacked out areas, just like numbers and stuff, is, and probably where most people's eyes tend to go right about this time of year and kind of junior year, is GPA. Okay, GPA is an important number, but sometimes I think there's a lot more weight put into GPA than maybe we need to give it credit for. Okay, but basically, I mean, GPA, if you don't know, stands for grade point average. So every grade that you earn up here, so A would get a 4, B would get a 3, and so on and so forth. F's do not get any numbers, and a weighted class, so like an AP course, actually earns 5. Okay, and a common misconception about AP courses is that, say for example, you got a C in an AP class, oh, that means my grade's gonna be a B. Not true, okay, but it does give you a GPA point as if the grade was a B. Okay, so that's where that bonus or extra comes in, all right? There's 6 different ones, okay, because colleges and us like to look at different things to give us different contextual information. There's 2 columns, weighted and non-weighted. The weighted ones includes all those extra bonus points in that calculation. The non-weighted ones doesn't, okay? The highest mathematical number that you can get in a non-weighted GPA is a 4.0. As soon as you earn a B in any course, you are no longer ever going to have a 4.0 in the non-weighted category. But you could have above a 4.0 in the weighted category, okay? And so that is an important piece. In this non-weighted category, this is how we determine things like summa cum laude for seniors. Okay, we have cum laude, anybody above a 4.0 weighted GPA, summa cum laude, anybody with straight A's. Essentially, and that's not actually even true. It's the non-weighted 4.0, okay? So, which equals straight A's, but it's easier, and technically it's this that matters, okay? The 3 rows, the first 2 are academic GPA. That's only going to include anything without this asterisk. So that's why you'll see some differences between some of the different numbers. Okay, so these non-academic classes, like PE, we love our PE classes, but in terms of these GPAs and some factors, they're not included. The last one includes everything. Okay, any graded class that's not like a Pathways pass-fail class. This middle one, the top one and the bottom one are all 9 through 12, all grades included. The middle one is grades 10 through 12, and why this one is important is because this GPA is the closest approximation you're going to get to what's called your A through G UC CSU GPA. Okay, so when you apply to any of those 4-year California State Universities or University of California schools, they do some wonky stuff with how they look at classes. For example, they all have to be A through G, anything with a star they don't even want. PE does not get listed anywhere. Okay, it's like you never took it to them. Okay, but they also do not include 9th grade in their GPA. So they basically throw out all the 9th grade classes, and they use all their A through G classes from the grades 10 and 11. Okay, and that's the best way to kind of get an idea what your GPA might look like when CSUs or UCs look like. I say best because they do a bunch of other wonky stuff, which would take us 30 minutes and probably confuse the heck out of everybody to go through, okay? But they do their own things with like AP weight and stuff like that, okay? So that's the best way to look at that piece. And when students actually apply in the senior year, they're actually going to recalculate it based on some rules that they give them. Okay. Any questions? That's transcripts. So I mean, it's a lot of information. It's very, very important. Okay. And this is why we have students in 11th and 12th grade check them at the beginning of the year. One is for accuracy. And this is something that I would encourage parents to do as well. Pull them up on areas. Check to make sure, like we didn't give you underwater basket weaving instead of AP Bio on accident. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's a one number change that changes what the course code is. Okay, so it's very important, especially also if you maybe had transferred from different schools. When you transfer schools, it should be fairly similar, but it oftentimes might not read exactly the same as what the original one will. Okay, we have generic course codes and course codes that go through district approval. For students from outside of our district with education credits coming in, we have to use these kind of more generic codes, and so it might look slightly different, okay, but it all should essentially mean the same thing. Okay, so it's just important to review it for accuracy and help make sure that we are also reviewing it for accuracy too. Okay, we have found errors, we fix them very quickly, but it's important that you're on our team because sometimes when I'm checking these things, I get transcript blindness and I just, you start looking at things too much and it starts to slip by you. Okay, so we just need your help there. Another piece of information that I want to take a second talking about, we talked a little bit about it last year, but it's rather important, and everything I say is important tonight, but I feel like I'm saying that a lot. Everything's important. But the thing that we've started to notice, and we've made more of a concerted effort to have conversations about and really try to bring awareness to, is a phenomenon about transition. Okay, I've noticed 3 primary phases of transition in high school. Okay, and the first 2 are relatively obvious. Transition from 8th to 9th grade, you kind of get used to high school, you get kind of your feet wet, everything's brand new, you're trying to figure yourself out and reinvent yourself. Second one is kind of the second obvious one. Outside of high school, you're graduating, going off into the quote-unquote real world, whether that's college, work, gap year, European vacation, whatever. Okay. The third one is a little bit less obvious, but it's when for us in school systems, it's fairly obvious when you look at data, when you talk to people. Okay, and that is actually this 10th to 11th grade transition. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I mentioned the maturation. Okay, so the students are kind of starting to mature a little bit into from more teen to more adult. Okay, in terms of their thinking, their mindset, their outlook, their things they want to be involved in. Okay. It also changes what is available for them to do. They can start driving, they can make more choices about their education, more things are thrown at them in terms of expectations as well as responsibility. Okay? And so 9th and 10th grade, so this is time at the bottom and effort and undertaking on the y-axis. In 9th grade, like I said, it kind of is a slow start. People kind of all take pretty similar classes for the most part, pretty even keeled for the most part, at least kind of academic achievement-wise. It might be totally different emotionally, might be the complete opposite, but that's kind of like the entrance level. 10th grade, most people kind of step it up a little bit. They kind of take a little bit harder classes. They, like I mentioned, they have access to a few AP classes they can choose. The thing that we really started to notice is this. So in 11th grade, students really kind of jump in the deep end with both feet, okay, in a lot of different ways. And that's not necessarily bad. Okay, it's not a bad thing in the grand sense of it. But what we've noticed, working with a lot of students over the last couple years as we added more AP classes and made things available, is that there's an expectation or kind of perception that students must take everything that we offer, or else maybe they're doing something wrong. Okay, and we notice students kind of taking a ton of things that really maybe they can be successful at. And the question shifts from can they to should they? And what else might they do to develop themselves as a person, stay healthy, think, be involved in other things that will help them become that well-rounded students? Because believe it or not, Stanford, Harvard, they don't want every valedictorian to be on campus. I would say that's probably a pretty boring campus if that was the case. okay? They want well-rounded students. Of course, they want smart students who are highly achieved, okay? But they also want students who can create a culture, who have passion is a rough word to use with high school students, interests, okay? And other things that they can bring to the table, which generally you can't do if you don't have time to do it. Okay, so that's an important thing. And every family and every student are going to look slightly different. Okay, and everybody's going to have a slightly different goal. Okay? And so your job as parents and as students, and my job partly, is to help you filter and frame some of that conversation. And my job sometimes is to kind of be the encourager. Sometimes I'm the one that's saying, hey, you're kind of taking it easy. It's time to step it up. You can do it. Sometimes, and oftentimes harder, is sometimes I am the person kind of playing devil's advocate of saying, okay, so are you sure you want to do this? It seems kind of like a big risk to me, or like, what else are you going to do, like with your time and energy and things like that. And so my job is really to kind of help bounce ideas off of you, not tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but really help you think about that, okay? So just be aware of that, because here's what happens next, okay? Usually, senior year, people tend to hit cruise control. They're like, I'm a senior, I'm taking only 4 classes, I'm out of here after lunch, whatever it might be. Some students don't, but that's the general perception of what happens, and usually accurate. They're still achieving highly, but maybe not kind of at the same level as maybe this year people think they need to. The problem with senior year, and this is something that you have to think about, is this. Okay, it's called senioritis, and it's it's not technically an actual diagnosable disease, but it should be. About springtime, right when we come back from like the holiday break, usually after finals in January, but especially as the snow starts melting. But up here, snow's not an excuse. Many times it's a poor habit for kids, like it's snowing, let's go. And it kind of starts earlier up here than in other places. But it's like everything that they've worked for doesn't matter anymore, and I just want to be at the beach. I've already got my college sweatshirt or my job lined up or whatever it might be, and senioritis kicks in, okay? It's a long ways out for you guys, comparatively, but it's something that matters now because the habits that we put in place now will carry over into senior year, and it doesn't matter if your kid is a 4.5 GPA student or a 2.0 student, this hits everybody pretty equally across the board, okay? So it's something just to be aware of. You don't have to like put signs up like avoid senioritis, like with no smoking signs, but it's something you just want to make sure that you have in the back of your brain as you start going towards that senior year of this might happen, and we just need to be aware, because this has real lasting ramifications if it does and it's not addressed. Students get college admissions rescinded, they have failures, they're no longer eligible for sports, whatever it might be. Has real consequences that are not North Tahoe. Our consequences are, don't tell Mitchell or Padilla this, but are pretty light comparatively. Like, we're a pretty soft place to land for most students. Like, once students get older, it's a pretty tough world, and there's hard realities that they might have to face, okay? So let's talk about a little bit of options, and this is kind of where we'll talk a little bit about kind of more of the 4-year college piece, okay, to some extent, because, like I said, some of that starts now. We mentioned some of the 4-year colleges. We have the University of California system, the CSU or California State University system, the 23 CSUs, the 8 UCs, a lot of private schools, thousands of private schools, and then out-of-state public institutions. Those are some of the 4-year colleges and universities. For the greater sense of the word, college and university essentially means the same thing. There are some specific differences, but when you're thinking about it, usually pretty interchangeable. There's junior colleges, community colleges, 2-year colleges. Again, very similar things, different ways to say it. 114 in the state of California alone. And some big news from the state of California relatively recently is that they are now going to be giving free tuition. 2 years of free tuition. I had some questions earlier. On the 25th of September, I will be doing a senior financial aid information night. And I had some questions from junior parents wondering if they could come. I'm not going to tell you no. It's never a bad thing to come. You might have to stand. It might be pretty crowded. That's one of our more popular nights because we're talking about money. It's fairly boring. It's money. It's kind of like pretty not interesting. But it might be good. It's not a bad thing to get informed about the process, knowing that sometimes it changes year to year. Okay? And there's nothing that you'll necessarily be doing super a lot of right now as a junior. Most of it happens in senior year. Okay, but that is an important thing that we'll go through more in detail on that night about how finances impact where students go to school and what options become available. Trade and vocational schools, an example might be like WyoTech, Universal Technical Institute, the Culinary Institute of America. All those places help students really focus on a specific field without all the extra. Okay, they don't have to take maybe a math class that's not necessarily impacting what they're going to walk out of school and do. Okay, so it takes a lot of the fluff out and really very focused. Straight to a career, military, Peace Corps, gap year, study abroad, lots of other options. Okay, again, all these are great options. You just have to know what your goal is. About junior year, another thing hits, and it's called panic about college. This is an important year. Okay, they're all important years. This one is one of the more important years. I would actually say senior year is more important, but this one is pretty vital. And in the world of college admissions, like this competitive world. And there's something called comprehensive review. And I want to kind of just give you a quick example of what that actually means. So if I asked you to describe what this tree looks like, you might say, well, it has bark. Maybe it's alive. It's brown. Doesn't look like it maybe has an infestation of bugs or things like that. Okay. But you can't really tell probably a whole lot. You can't tell how big it is. You can't tell how tall it is, what type it is, where it's at. Is it laying on its side or is it standing up? A lot of detail is left out. This is the general perception of what college applications and college admissions look like. That colleges are going to look at a snapshot of your kid in a very zoomed in way, and that's all they're going to get to see. There's one great example of that way of looking at college applications, and that's the CSU system. They are very much numbers based. They don't have any essays or any letters of recommendation, any activities. You're really a GPA, test score, coursework that you've taken. Okay, very not holistic in my opinion. Okay, but it works for them. Their goal is to admit students and do a pretty good job. But they're not going to know that you were like prom queen or something like that. Okay, they're just going to see if you did well. But vast majority of schools actually review applications more like this, and it's called comprehensive review. Okay, or holistic review is another way to say it. And what that means is they're going to take into account, yes, those things that are in that snapshot picture, grades, GPA, test score, those are kind of like the trunk. Those have to exist. Okay, they have to be the core piece of who students are applying as. But there's so many other pieces that make that tree the tree that they need to look at as well. Okay, there's contextual information about growing up. There's interests/passions that you might have had outside of school that many schools really value and look at. There's writing components that let students talk about themselves. There's writing components that let adults talk about the students. Okay, and those things are a part of a comprehensive review system that UCs use, private schools use, many other institutions use as part of their process at differing levels. Okay, so I want to take. It might take a little bit of the pressure off, but it also might add a little bit of pressure back if you're kind of following. So it can take some of the pressure off of like, hey, my GPA or my test scores or my classes aren't exactly the way I hope they might be. Okay, so it might take a little bit of pressure off there, but it could add some back if all you're doing is school. Okay, because they're looking for a well-rounded student. You got to have that core piece, but you got to have they want to admit a quality human. Not just someone who's going to study and do well on tests. Okay, and so that's a big piece too. And it doesn't mean that a student has to be like the cheer captain or the rally person, like, and be all in front of people and like the pep person, because that's what people would think, like, oh, they're involved in everything. Like, play video games, but do it with purpose. Like, understand, start a club, work with coding, develop something, like learn in a passion that you might have, and that is valuable information that colleges, that employers want. Okay, it's something that you are pursuing that you're interested in. This is an example of the UC kind of different things that they look at that make up this comprehensive review. And I think it's probably purposefully like this, but it kind of is essentially in order. This is generally the more important stuff. This is generally kind of important, but maybe not so much if some of these don't all align with some of their goals. Okay, so it lets them explore things more specifically with students. Okay, you'll see geographic location up there. Schools in California have a calling to serve students across the state, not just from very specific population areas that are maybe close by. Okay, so they do look at look at some of these. Will where you live overcome your GPA? Probably not. But it can help make a difference if you're getting a choice. Okay, if there's a decision between you and maybe someone else, it might help sway a decision one way or the other. So here's a pretty generic formula for where students should apply. I don't necessarily always subscribe to this formula, and it's really a starting place and a place to start you thinking. Okay, and the reason why I don't subscribe to it, because number one is it provides numbers. Like, there's no correct number of applications that a student should do for any university or system. Okay? The correct number is the correct number for your student. Okay? But there are some suggestions based on statistics, likelihood, history, research, things like that. Okay? So this kind of breaks it up. This will get you about it will get you 6 schools that students might apply to. Okay? And so it just breaks it up into different categories based on a couple things about your student as well as a couple things about the school. Okay? Reach school, or kind of stretch schools, or like super uber hard schools, whatever you want to call it, are going to be schools that maybe, and you don't have to have one of those. I want to point that out. A reach school does not have to be a reach school to be on your list. Like, you don't have to apply to a hard school just because it's on this page. Like, apply to the schools you want. But your list probably should not all be reach schools, and that's kind of why that's up there. Okay, if you're doing that, you're playing statistics against you. Go try that with the stock market, and it's probably going to bite you. Okay, so the same thing applies here. Generally, you don't want to have too many of those schools where you might not fit, like your profile, your GPA, some of these number pieces. You can look up the averages from some of these schools, and you want to kind of fit in that general vicinity that most people are getting in. Okay, they'll usually give it to you in percentiles. So 50th percentile, 75th percentile, meaning that, if you're at the 50th, you're about half of the students above you got in, while half of the people below you likely didn't. Okay, target schools are kind of where you want to aim the most of your energy. Okay, those are the schools that you're gonna be a pretty competitive applicant, but also where they're hitting a lot of your areas of need as a student. Okay, safety schools are also another word I don't like, because no such thing as safety schools. I've seen and had students that thought a school was pretty safe and they didn't get in, and thought a school was like impossible to get into and they did. Okay, and so this world of admissions in college and stuff like that is not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of room for error on many different areas. Okay, and there's a lot of room for, thinking one way and then seeing something else happen for whatever that's worth. Okay, the biggest thing about how students start developing, and this is something that you will do over the course of junior year, with the goal, if you are applying to a college, a four-year university, to come back at the end of summer of senior year, with a pretty decent list of an idea of kind of like, hey, these are the ones I'm thinking about. I might need to do a little bit more research, but this is kind of where I'm thinking. Okay. The biggest thing is all of these schools, if you get into just one, you should be happy to go there. Okay, and that's important. A lot of times I'll sit down with a student or a family and be like, so tell me why that school's on your list. And again, it's I don't know, or my mom told me so, or whatever it might be. Okay, and Murphy shows up more often than not. Okay, Murphy's law is if anything will go wrong, it will. And that will be the one school that your student ends up getting into, and then they have a pretty tough choice. Okay, so all of them, yes, have a hierarchy. You might have your first choice of those schools, but you should be happy looking at and potentially attending any school that you go to. Okay. So it shouldn't be like, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's like, oh, I didn't get my first one, but maybe my third one is going to be a great option for me. Okay. Junior colleges, and we're looking at that option. That, I feel like we go through waves in terms of junior college admissions after high school, usually tied pretty closely to economy is what I see. So it's a big push after kind of like a recession, a little bit less so after kind of a big economy boom. A lot of it's tied to money. I'm not going to break down much of the money tonight. If you're interested, you can either watch the recording of the financial aid one or the evening in a couple weeks, or attend if you'd like, or we'll talk more about it next year. Usually, junior college can be less expensive. It is not always the case. I would say 2 years of tuition free will help that calculation a little bit. Junior college tuition is not wildly expensive in the grand scheme of college. Okay, so it's not the biggest piece of money in the world of college at 2-year level is room and board. So if you're looking to save money, it might hurt your feelings. Well, maybe parents might be like, yay, or maybe no, but you might have to have your kid live at home, and that's going to be where the biggest money saving is going to happen for that junior college world if they stay local. Okay? If you look, if kids go down to Santa Barbara City College, tuition is $3,500 or something like that. Okay, so it's not wildly the largest portion of it. Where room and board's gonna be 12, 15 grand. Places like Santa Barbara. Some places will be cheaper. Okay. In the world of junior college, their admission cycle and process looks different. They're generally non-competitive admissions. There might be competitive programs within a school, say a nursing program or something like that. But entrance into the college is wide open for the most part. Okay? And so that's a great thing. If I ruled the world, every senior would have a junior college application submitted and in, ready to go. Because it's not a backup plan, it's an alternative. So if a student applied to a four-year college, they might just want to consider that as another option. And I would encourage it. I think it should be a part of kind of your senior requirements, in my opinion. You don't need to have a list. So that list applies only to like four-year colleges. You do want to have your research done, but it's not something that you have to have a list to apply to a ton of them. You're going to do all your research and then pick which one is right for you. There are increased amounts of what's called guaranteed transfers or associate's degrees for transfer degrees out there. And what that means is if you complete certain kind of programmatic expectations at the junior college, I hate the word guarantee. There's a lot of loopholes I find sometimes in guarantees, but they use that as the word. There's a pretty good guarantee that you can get it pretty easy acceptance into a program at, say, a CSU or a UC later on in that field of study, should you meet some of those things. Okay. If a student, potentially another route is if a student maybe didn't have a great high school experience, or maybe screwed around in the freshman or sophomore year, and now kind of like, hey, I do want to go to college and pulling their act together, which we see more often than not. They might not be super admissible right off the bat to a four-year college, or it might not be the right fit. They might not be ready for that level. Okay. This program also, this transfer program, also lets students continue to work on their academic maturity while also working towards that bachelor's degree if that's their goal. Okay. Junior colleges also give terminal degrees. Okay, they have associate's degrees, they have certificates. There's a lot of different programs that happen there. Okay, so it's a great, great opportunity. The one downside I'll tell you that you have to kind of keep an eye out for. Because it is not competitive admissions, they are going to admit a large amount of students, depending on the campus. That does not mean that they're going to plan classes for all of their students who are enrolled in the school. Okay, so sometimes students can have some trouble getting courses that they need to help stay on track. So it really requires a very good plan, communication with the staff of the college, and sometimes a little luck. Okay, so you have to get through in that 2 years, because people say it's a 2-year college or a 2-year transfer program. That's what it's designed as, to how long it should take you, but it's really a 60-unit college if you're going down the transfer path. 60 units of transferable units are what you need, whether that takes you 2 years or 4 years. Okay, so it pays off to do things kind of as they say. All right, so let's talk briefly, and we will probably run a few minutes over. I apologize if you have places to go. Again, don't feel bad about getting up and leaving, or if I'm just boring. Either one's fine. But there's a few things that when you're starting this list to research, and that's really kind of your main goal for this year is research. Okay. What are our must-haves? I like to have kind of a sheet of paper that's split in half, and these are the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and the must-have-nots. I guess thirds. The must-haves, and parents and students can make their own list. I would say the students trumps the parents. Okay, but parents, you guys have valuable input in this. Because students, guess what? Many times they're the ones who's giving you money to do this. Okay, so they are not to be ignored in this process. Okay, they are someone who has value to add, and likely may have participated in this process before. Okay, it might have changed dramatically since then, but it's very important. Finding out some of these must-haves, and I usually suggest starting with, like, most people are like, do they have micromanaging business major degree 101, like super specific. And that's usually the opposite end of the spectrum I want to start at. Start broad. Location is probably one of the biggest, most common things that people look at. And guess where probably the number one place that people go to up here is? The beach. Okay. Guess where the second one is? Colorado. Okay, and the third is probably Montana, and the fourth is probably Sacramento. So some are the same and some are completely opposite. Okay, but these questions, especially these first few, are more important than most people give it credit for. They seem pretty obvious. Okay, and they seem like, oh yeah, it sounds like I can think about that for 30 seconds and I'll make a decision. Okay, the reason why they're so important, why they deserve a lot of thought and energy put into them, is because it's also the number one reason why students return home from school. They don't think about they think about some of the different programmatic and academic things, which are important, but they ignore a lot of the culture, a lot of this place. Okay, that college is learning, but college is also about life and experience. And it's not usually the academics that send students home, like my professor sucked or my classes were too big. It's usually like, I didn't feel like I was at home. I didn't realize that it was going to take me 2 hours to go 20 minutes in LA. Things like that, it's too far away. Those are things that people don't necessarily always think about, and they think, oh, I can't wait to move to a big city. And unless you've lived in a big city, many times people don't really know what that means. It's nice to visit, it's tough to live there sometimes. Okay, and same thing, people from big cities, they want to come to Tahoe, and many times it's going to be, it's an adjustment. Sometimes you can handle it, sometimes you can't. So that's a big thing to really think about. Any special interest? Political climate is not something to be ignored on campus. Okay, so there are schools that align one way or the other, and depending on your own alignment or your students' kind of preferences, like those things are things to pay attention to. What does the campus culture feel like? What do students look like there? Are there a diverse amount of students that look like me or feel like me or talk like me? Okay, finances. This is a big one where parents' ears kind of perk up a little bit. Okay. I hesitate to say ignore finances right now, but it should be loosely researched at this point. Okay. Again, we don't have time to go into the finances right now, but we do things opposite. We do things backwards in college admissions in the United States. We pick out exactly what we want. We go and pretty much put a down payment on it. And then about a couple months later, you figure out, okay, well, how much does this actually cost? Okay, we don't get to price things out. We can make a few pretty educated guesses, but you don't really know. And that's where it's tricky, because like if I showed you a private school and they're like, yep, tuition right at that $60,000, that's not even including room and board, probably almost everybody in here would be like, nope, hard pass, I'm out. I would be too. Okay, but it's kind of like buying a car. Like you don't, just because the MSRP is just that. Okay, sometimes you get things on sale. And a lot of it's independent of your family, your financial situation, maybe some risks that you're willing to take, okay, and what is valuable to you. One family might value taking out a little bit of extra loans to access this school, where other families might not. Okay. Another big thing that when you're researching that you want to pay attention to is graduation rate. Okay, and that's 4-year graduation rate, not 6-year, which is oftentimes what's thrown around. Okay. Believe it or not, in CSU UC system, 6 years is pretty common. 5 to 6 years is relatively common for many majors, okay? Because they say, we'll get you through in 4 years, but then they give you like 40 units to do every quarter, and it's absolutely crazy. Like you do nothing else except for homework, and then you still probably struggle, okay? That really makes a big difference in a couple ways. Okay, graduation rate impacts not only how long it takes you, but it impacts finances in a big way too. Okay, which actually, you know what, if you compared like a private school to a public school potentially, you might not be paying more for a private school, but they might have a 4-year graduation guarantee. They say if you do these classes in a more reasonable fashion typically, we're gonna get you out of here on time, okay? You might pay 10 grand more a year, but when you break it down, you're like, hey, if it takes me 5 years to get through Sacramento State with this degree, I'm losing money I could be making as a college graduate. That's an average of $40,000 a year, okay? I'm paying tuition for another year, which many times loses some of your scholarship benefit in that 5th year. Okay, so that's another 20 or 30 grand. Okay, where you might break even, and sometimes it makes those private colleges a little bit more attractive when you actually crunch the numbers in a little bit different way, versus just looking at sticker shock price, because everyone gets sticker shock. That is no doubt. All right. So there's some different tools that you can use. We're going to kind of skip this. This is more student focused, so I'm going to spend time with them doing some of this stuff about Naviance and different tools that they have access to. Many times they likely have already done some of this stuff, and that's good. Okay. If not, don't be alarmed. 9th and 10th grade is not heavy on Naviance. Okay, it really starts picking up steam and usefulness, and like students will choose to do this without being told to do this year. Again, because they see the relevance of it now. Okay, and that's where kind of the power of this program is. Okay, so we're gonna skip over some of that piece. Another piece that I want to touch on before we wrap up, there's a couple testing components that are pretty important for this year. All right. First and foremost in our mind is the PSAT will be given on October 16th. Okay, so that's coming up. And if I sent an email out towards the beginning of the year, I think I said September 16th in error. Again, blindness at looking at things, and I think I had September on my brain. I did that with 2 dates on accident. That's like a Saturday or something, not that date. October 16th at school. But what's important for you to know is and we'll be sending this out probably next week. We're finalizing a few details. It's going to be a wonky schedule. Okay, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders will all be taking the PSAT, and it'll happen in their pathways classes. Happen through about 11:30, 11:45 or so in the morning. Okay, it's free. We pay for it. All students have to do is show up. But one thing to note is it's on a block day, but it will not be a block day. Okay, so there will be no RTI. If you show up after normal RTI, thinking, I don't have to be there, I can sleep in, you will not be taking the PSAT. Okay, we will remind you of this, but it's an important thing just to write down. And periods will also be a little wonky in the afternoon. For example, if you're on Ski Academy or something like that, just know, like, check the schedule when we put it out and make arrangements because it will be a little bit weird. This is junior year is when you are entered to the National Merit Scholarship Competition. Generally, we don't talk much about it. It's pretty tough. State of California makes it pretty near impossible. Okay, if you lived in Rhode Island, it might look a little different because it's in relation to the students of our state. Okay, we have the most amount of students in our state, so it's very, very difficult. Not uncommon to get like a commended or maybe even a qualified or something like that. But to actually earn money through this, it's pretty impossible. Very, very slim chances. Not impossible, but it would be pretty impressive. SATs and ACTs are also something that really kick up this year. Okay, so this is something that we'll wrap up with tonight, but I want to take about 10 minutes, if that's okay, and talk through both of those things. Okay, those tests are important in that college admission. Remember that tree? Okay, again, those are a part of the trunk, the important pieces. One of the biggest reasons, and trust me, I hate the College Board. They are one of the worst organizations in my opinion because they're the most lucrative nonprofit I've ever seen. But that all aside, there is some value to it, but a lot of people are questioning whether they're still valuable. So you'll see in your research, you might find colleges that are going to be what's called test optional schools. Okay, so they are schools that say, hey, you know what? If you have an SAT or ACT you want to send us, great, we'll look at it. But if not, it's not a requirement because we no longer value it in our process. Okay, so it's more of like, here's another measure that we can send or not send. The hard part is all of our state institutions require one of the 2 exams at least one time. Okay, the ACT or SAT. The biggest reason why they are valued is because they're what's called a nationally normed exam. And statistically, they can link scores from someone's 11th grade here to someone in New York's test they took a year later, okay, and they can compare them apples to apples. Where transcripts, extracurriculars, you can't compare us with Trent because we're different. Okay, GPAs are different, grading scales are different, expectations are different, course availability is different. So pretty much it's the pretty one and only thing that you can kind of bank on being pretty similar across the country and around the world. Okay, so that's why so much value is put on these tests by colleges. Okay, it's their one true measure, true with quotes. Okay, some details about kind of the length. Okay, I always get questions about the essay, and kind of my advice, just like with college admissions, there's not really a hard and fast rule or answer, but my best advice is typically, I would rather you have the essay scores from each exam and not need it than need it and not have it. Okay, so I encourage taking the essay when you sign up for the exam. Sit for it. Usually students improve each time they take it, and if you don't, schools are going to look at your they're admissions officers, they're not denial officers. They're going to take the information that you can provide that gives them the best evidence that you're going to be a good candidate for their school and use that to admit you. Okay, they're not going to nitpick and say, well, you scored like a 1600 on this one exam, but you only got a 1400 over here. You proved yourself. Okay, so don't go, people tend to get all like stuck in the details. Okay, those details are out of your control. The schools are going to do what they do with them, and many times we don't know what that looks like. Okay, so please don't do that. There is a fee waiver if you qualify for free and reduced lunch at school, which lets you take 2 exams for free, and the rest are self-pay. A big change that happened in 2016, so it's now starting to get a little antiquated, but I want to mention because some resources you might have at home or maybe your students have looked at maybe have said like, be careful guessing. They used to actually take a quarter point away if you got a wrong answer, 0 points away if you left it blank, and 1 point if you answered correctly. So there was actually kind of a statistics game people would play. Should I guess or not guess? Should I guess or not guess? Could I cut it down by 2? Maybe my statistics, make a good sense to guess C. Okay, there's no penalty. So essentially, if you have 5 seconds left, CC, just bubble something in. Okay, you might have a chance at getting something done. Okay, there's no penalty if you get a wrong answer or leave it blank. It's the same. Studying for the SAT, a lot of people ask about that in junior year too. Summer times tend to be a pretty good time to do that. We just got out of summer, so might have to use some of your time here. But breaks and weekends can be useful. Just don't overdo it. All right. This is directly from the SAT, the College Board. They've redesigned it in such a way that there's not these analogies of random words from a thesaurus anymore. Okay, it's more contextual pieces. It makes it easier in one sense that you don't have to know these crazy, this for that answers, but you have to think a lot more critically on this exam. Okay, they're going to give you, there's not a science component on the SAT, but they're going to give you science-based questions that you have to analyze a table that's based on scientific research or things like that, analyze it and provide a mathematical answer for them, or make inferences in English or things like that. So it's math and English, but it's going to use other tools. And they've done it in a way that basically if you're paying attention in what standard sophomores and juniors are expected to have gotten through, you should be able to score pretty well on the exam. Okay, it's aligned with a standard kind of curriculum that most sophomores and juniors are expected to have taken to be on track for college. Okay, the biggest thing that helps scores is typically, content, maybe a little bit, but it's actually familiarizing yourself with the actual exam. Okay, so you don't sit there and freeze the first time you take it. Or you realize, hey, I got 30 more questions, I got 20 more minutes, I better get going. Okay, and it's that timing. It's kind of the gaming the system that helps students kind of improve over time once they hit kind of a baseline score. Prep work, before I talk about the differences, the prep work that we generally have, usually in the spring, let me think back to my calendar. We don't have any, we usually have a half-day workshop or so for students here at school that we bring someone in to kind of go through in-depth SAT work. We don't have anything set on the books yet. It's something that's kind of in our to-do list. But if you're interested, just pay attention for emails and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's going to be in the fall or spring. I have to look at some different timing components. But there are two ways that are definitely accessible and free to you to do prep work for either the ACT or SAT. The SAT Khan Academy is our #1 place where we send people. It is directly partnered with the College Board. They have the most recently released test scores, or practice tests. They have self-scoring exams. Okay, so they are an online free SAT prep resource. Okay, fairly good. ACT prep happens through Naviance. Okay, so if students scroll down to the bottom of their Naviance homepage, there's an ACT prep software that if you went out, you'd probably pay about $300 to have access to this on your own. The school gets it for a much cheaper rate. We provide it to you for free. Both systems do a kind of a short diagnostic exam, and then they focus on the areas that you need the most help with. Okay, so they're not going to waste your time on all the stuff you're really good at. They're going to take the stuff that you might struggle with a little bit more and really get some practice. Okay, so take those diagnostics seriously because it helps focus that prep if you need it. There are other organizations and agencies out there which you guys are more than welcome to explore. They're going to charge you a lot more money, but it kind of depends on what your needs are. Okay, if you're looking for something that's more personalized, if you want to sit down with someone on a regular basis, you'd have to approach like a tutoring company, Kaplan, Tahoe Tutoring, Clever Minds, whoever else that provides those services, but it's not something that we necessarily provide at school. So you can get the support at any level that you want, okay? ACT, on the other hand, is the sister test to the SAT. You generally see the ACT a little bit more on the East Coast and Midwest. A lot of states will use the ACT actually as their state exam. So that's a big prevalence of why that's so popular there. Very similar in terms of expectations and things like that as the SAT. They're actually comparable. So there's something called a concordance table that will let you compare an SAT score if someone only took the SAT to an ACT score if someone only took the ACT, and they're interchangeable. So if you don't have to take both, but it's not a bad idea. All right, and here's why. ACT has a little bit different components that they look at, okay? They add a science component, which if you have a strong science background, you might be able to show your chops a little bit better in that area. Okay, so that it kind of is a little bit of kind of like an idea of like how might I score based on what I'm good at as a student. It's pretty similar time frame in terms of length, pretty similar in terms of question format and things like that. It's really more about the extra section. Scoring is clearly different, okay, and things like that, but it's all interchangeable. And kind of let's see, what is my next slide? I forget. If you're interested in that stuff, like I said, check the essays, but there are some required, like UCs require the essay still. I think that's why they actually created the essay, is the UCs. Students can do better on one or the other. So kind of the standardized, if I was to talk to all of you at once, kind of suggestion test-wise. Students typically will start, and they've changed a few of the test dates, so there's no longer like a January SAT anymore. There used to be. So that was kind of where I would use my benchmark. But there's like a December and March SAT. So you kind of have to pick early spring, late winter of junior year is kind of a pretty good time to start formally taking it. You'll have taken the PSAT in October. You should have gotten your results back by then. You might even be able to spend a little bit of time prepping if you wanted to. Okay. Your goal is typically to kind of have 2 to 3 scores is probably what's most suggested. Okay, like I said, it's not a one and done thing. Okay, if you do, you're probably not sending in your best score. Most students improve, but you do plateau. Okay, so it's not something you're going to want to do like every single time it's offered. You're going to hit your ability level, and no prep work or studying is going to necessarily change that score. Okay, so you want to hit that magic. 2 to 5 is kind of pretty standard. Okay, so anywhere in that range. Towards the beginning, I do suggest, unless you're like pretty confident or you've taken some of these practice exams or done a lot of prep work, I do suggest trying both, ACT and SAT, at least once. But I don't suggest doing both all the time. Take them both and compare your experience, compare your scores, compare which one literally just you felt better at. And stick with that one. Okay, like I said, they're used interchangeably. If you're going to split your time prepping for 2 different exams and it requires different prep, you're going to be wasting your time a little bit. Okay, so you're going to stick with the one. Most of our students will take the SAT more prevalently than the ACT. Primarily because we do the PSAT, we have AP program, so SAT is a part of our vernacular at school, okay, and so a lot of the AP work is directly related to maybe what's on the SAT itself. Okay, so that's a little bit more common of what you see. So we talked about this. It was in there. We talked through most of this already. The only thing I'll mention on this slide of what to do is keep track of it. All right, it's hard to remember with everything going on what you should be doing as you approach senior year applications and resumes and interviews and things like that. Okay, and it's not something that you want to fib. Okay, you need to be accurate in your application. So if you say I did 100 hours of volunteers and you didn't do it, there's likely not going to be someone calling and checking whether you did it or not. Okay, but there's an expectation that what you submit is accurate. And there's always a chance that they can. If something I have called on a letter of recommendation that I received because it didn't sound anything like the student. Okay, and so it does happen. Someone might call and verify what happened. Okay, and so just keep an eye on that. Like I said, winter, spring time frame is kind of when the real testing happens. And And that can continue into senior year. Okay, so it is something that if you took that 2, 3 to 5 range, 2 to 3 maybe in the fall, 1 or 2 in the spring, 1 or 2 in the fall, you should be hitting kind of your goal, or you might have to adjust some of your targets a little bit or adjust your expectations slightly. Okay, but usually up to about October, November of the fall of senior year is when they cut off accepting dates for testing. Okay, so most schools will say we're not going to take anything after this particular date. That should be a part of that research process as you get a little more serious about your list of when are deadlines, when's the latest I can take exams if you're going to push that deadline. Okay. Keep grades up. 10 visits. We mentioned the ILPs. We'll sit down and do those later in this winter. Okay, and it's something that's very valuable. Okay, we're going to probe and ask a lot of hard questions. We'll kind of talk through kind of coursework. We'll talk through plans, what your goals are, and things like that. So, it'll be about 20 minutes over, so thanks for your patience. What questions might you have? I'm sure there will be some. Nothing.
You were so comprehensive.
All right, well, if that's the case, let's go get dinner.
I have one.
Oh, okay.
So, what has been your experience with kids taking the SAT subject tests on top of
Good question.
normal SAT?
Number one is you should research if you need them or not. So if it's very few schools that actually need them, and very particular programs often that actually want them. So doing a little bit of research can save you some time and energy, and potentially like crying and stuff like that. They're hard, and typically students do that during their senior year more than typically. Okay, they're like extreme AP exams. Okay, and so that's usually we'll see them in the fall or something like that. So it's starting with kind of the general SAT or ACT, okay, and then maybe looking once that list gets finalized by the end of that summer, you might know if you need them or not. Okay, and that's pretty accessible for the most part on most college or department websites. You'll see it more frequently in some like more kind of impacted programs, or potentially some more kind of like the super uber highly selective schools. They'll have them. And here's a tip too about when you're reading information on college websites. You'll see a couple of words that are thrown around pretty often. One of them is required. Pretty obvious. This is required, you must do this. One of them is recommended. That equals required. Okay? So pretty much expect that. If you don't submit that, you better have a pretty good reason why. Okay, and there better be some supporting documentation in another area why that's not coming in. Okay? Suggested is a little bit lighter use of that word. Okay, so it's you'll see recommended quite frequently in relation to SAT subject tests, and that's something that you just have to be aware of. Like, if you don't submit them, you might be shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. Okay, so you have to kind of just use a little bit of caution there. But that usually happens in the fall time of senior year. But you want to plan ahead, kind of in the springtime of junior year, because they're only certain subjects are sometimes only offered on certain dates. Okay, or in certain locations and things like that. So you have to kind of like create a calendar and plan some of these things in advance. Okay, most registration for exams like this close about a month in advance, but sometimes certain locations will fill up prior to that. Okay, so if most expect to drive up here, sometimes Squaw has tests. They're pretty local, the closest usually for most people. But if not, you'll be driving early, and you can't be late, to Galena, South Lake, Reno, Carson. Okay, so you have to kind of just understand and kind of keep an eye on those calendars. That's a big piece of senior year, but also kind of an increasingly large piece of junior year too. It's being organized with your time and knowing when things are due, because those deadlines, like I said, we have soft deadlines here. Okay, we plan ahead. College board, colleges, these guys don't. One piece that I forgot to mention is athletics. NCAA, kind of junior year is a little bit of a big year for NCAA as well. So that's something that is tough because it's not an automatic thing that we do here. It's not something that are you an NCAA athlete? Are you an NCAA? Because no one really knows. It's kind of like this up in the air thing. I would say if you think you might, go through the process. Okay, but there is something called the NCAA Eligibility Center, or sometimes they call it the clearinghouse. So hop on that website now. Okay, because at the end of junior year, we'll be submitting transcripts as well as test scores, as well as at the end of the senior year after graduation. Okay, but understanding what that process looks like and some of the coursework that's also required for that to become eligible at different division levels. All that information is available on their website, so I encourage you to check that out now. And then once you do that, if you have questions about things, let me know. Okay, so it's pretty important. Yeah?
Back to the
SAT, ACT, is most of the prep done on websites now? Do
A
you
lot of
really
it.
have like a whole day, like back in our day, you'd go the whole day on a Saturday and go to a SAT prep course?
There are those things, so there's boot camps and whatever else that are available. Like I said, not as often up here. We do once a year usually up here for that short-term intensive one. The reason why you see a lot more online is because one, it's kind of customizable to the student. Like I said, you can do these prescriptive tests beforehand, and really they're going to focus their prep. You can't really do that with 30 kids in a class necessarily. Okay, so you're going to get a lot more generalities, not necessarily bad ones, pretty good ones. If you're looking for that truly customized one-on-one, it's going to cost a couple $1,000s probably for one-on-one, consistent, and time. But it's also the least expensive to implement and the least time-consuming and impactful also on students usually. So you don't have to necessarily be in a certain place at a certain time. You can pause it and come back to it. You can do it from the plane or the airport or at home or wherever you might be. Calculus class. Any other questions? Did that answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll stick around for a few minutes. I got 3-year-olds to get to bed, hopefully by the time I get home. But if you have a few short questions, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, we can set up time to talk in the future if you'd like. But thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.